It's Independence Day in the United States, July 4th, which is a celebration of the U.S. formally becoming a nation back in 1776, and as suggested by the lyrics of our national anthem. Francis Scott Key specifically mentioned the rocket's red glare and the bombs bursting in air, which may have been the original inspiration for one of our enduring traditions, which is July 4th fireworks. I love fireworks. We were talking about it before. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved trying to set them off. I was kind of blocked out because I lived in a state that has laws against it. Arizona's a very dry state, and fireworks cause a lot of problems, so they're very strict about that. But whenever I could get away from that, I would go out and kind of just as a kid set off as many as I could get my hands on. And eventually I started going to the bigger and bigger fireworks displays, and I got fascinated by this whole idea of pyrotechnics. It is a beautiful art. I consider it an art. And I tried to start taking pictures when I started getting into media and production, and I found a lot of challenges, way more than I expected. I'd see things in a magazine and a beautiful photo of fireworks, and I'd say, why can't I do that? Why can't I just take my camera, point it in the sky, and get a beautiful picture of fireworks? Well, it was a lot harder than I figured, and I tried to start figuring out why. And if you want to do this over the course of time, if you want to become a better firework or drone show or any kind of high contrast photographer, you're going to be running into this challenge about dynamic range. As we've talked about here on the show a lot, dynamic range is the difference between the brightest and darkest parts of any image. And fireworks, burning chemicals, are bright. We want them to be bright and beautiful and colorful. The night sky is dark, and we want it to be dark. And that stark contrast, when captured well, has a really special beauty. And again, not just for traditional fireworks, but the aerial drone shows we're starting to see out there. And there's other challenging night shoot kind of circumstances like cityscapes and traffic trails. And in order to get this right, you kind of have to start paying attention to exposure times and shutter speeds and black levels, and it takes some effort. And I have just a couple of slides here. I'm going to switch to Keynote here, and let me pop this open. And I'm going to give you some examples of what I've run across and why I've had trouble. This first image is, I consider, pretty mediocre fireworks shot. It's one of the ones I shot some years ago. About 3 or 4 years ago here in San Diego at a big fireworks display they have called the Big Bay Boom. And I was very dissatisfied with my results on this. And the reason is I didn't get that giant contrast that I really liked. You know, we got a lot of milky sky up here. I'm not getting a lot of detail in the heart of the fireworks here in this part of the image. The black levels are okay in some of these, the tree areas, but generally they're also milky in places like that. So there's a lot of things going on here that I just did not like. And it didn't look like those kind of professional fireworks captures that really look magnificent. So I thought, what are the problems that I'm having? One of them was the location. I would go and pre-look at what fireworks displays were around me and whether or not I could find a really good location. And what are the other techniques I could use? In this particular one, I'm also going to highlight one of the things about fireworks is you can decide whether you want to shoot the firework explosion itself up in the sky or whether you want to have some context, like in this case where you've got people that are giving you a sense of scale and a sense of you are there. That's just one of the many techniques about shooting fireworks. We are also shooting them on different kinds of things now. We're shooting on phones instead of bigger cameras. And sometimes you have as much control, sometimes you don't. Manual control of phones can be a little more difficult than some other kinds of things. So what tools are you using to actually shoot them? And when you get into those tools, what are the settings? One of the things I wanted to pop up, if you're going to use an iPhone or another smartphone to shoot them, look for something like night mode on the phone, which allows for slower shutter speeds. And in fact, if you want to go to the next level of manual control, you will find some things you can do by going into your phone. You'll also find third-party apps, and the third-party apps allow you to have significantly more control over what you're going to be setting your phone for. In particular, I mentioned here halide, specter, and slow shutter. Those are three things I always have on my phone in case I get into a circumstance of this kind of high contrast lighting that I want to have look good. when I started going out in my DSLR days to try to figure out this problem of really bright up there and really dark behind it, problems like that first image I showed you where the smoke and the light of the ambient area that I'm shooting is caused everything to be kind of milky. You know, for me, if I'm going to a fireworks display and I'm trying to figure out where to set up, one of the things I want to do is figure out which way the wind is likely to be coming in, and is there going to be wind? Some of the least successful fireworks photography circumstances I've been in is when it's been completely still. Because the first fireworks look great, but then the smoke from the early aerial explosion starts gathering and gathering and gathering. And the next thing you know, you're getting toward the finale and the entire environment is full of smoke that's reflecting the lights of the buildings around you and whatever, and everything gets milky and indistinct. And it's a real big challenge. So I'm looking for what's in my frame. Where can I take advantage of maybe the wind if there's a little breeze there that's going to be moving the smoke out of my way? And that's going to determine, do I want to get wide shots or do I want to do close-ups? When I finally started figuring out some settings and things like that, I started to get some really interesting personal fireworks photos out. And I'm going to show you just a few and kind of talk about the things that I found. These are just little tricks that I learned over the course of the year because, again, I do love shooting this kind of thing. The first one is an image I took at Tempe Town Lake in Arizona, and it's a close-up, and I don't know why I like this image so much, but it's one of my favorites that I think I've ever taken during a fireworks show. It's very much more like abstract art than it is trying to get a specific, here's a piece of fireworks in the sky. It is cropped in a little bit, but not too much, and this is the result of a slow shutter, of allowing the rays of the firework to come out. Not a terribly slow shutter. But then the next thing I did, and the next photo I want to show you, I think is one of my earlier really fun results. And it has to do with giving a long exposure. And the technique I used, I kind of developed out on the night that I was doing this, which is to trigger the shutter and then tap the handle of the tripod just a little bit to move over. And that's where this unusual trail things comes from. Shutter speed, action like that. Here's another one of the ones that I like. Again, I'm trying to look for more an abstract kind of thing as opposed to these are fireworks sitting, the traditional fireworks photos you see. This one I also love because for some reason in the little movement I applied to the lens at the time of the fireworks, it almost looks like a ghost human floating up in the sky. And I just really enjoy that kind of thing. I enjoy trying to make it something more than just the average shot that everybody does of fireworks. So my advice to you is that this is one of those great holidays where you get to go out, you get to have, you're doing a barbecue or a picnic somewhere outside. You know the fireworks show is going to come. If you're in the family kind of part of your life, the kids are playing, having a great time. Maybe they're going to burn themselves out. Eventually, everybody's going to settle down, and you're going to have 45 minutes, an hour. That's kind of typical. Half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour is a typical fireworks show that I've been to over the course of my career in going to, enjoying, and shooting fireworks. And in that amount of time, you have time to play around a little bit. And so my suggestion to you, if you want to have fun with fireworks, is take a tripod, set up whatever camera or phone you're going to do, figure out kind of in the first 10 or 15 shots you're going to do exactly what you're trying to do. Decide whether you want to get up close like those ones that I showed you where you want to see the burst itself, or whether you want to pull back and get people or bridge work or water. A lot of those high-end shots you saw have water as a feature. If you're near a lake or a river or something like that, the reflections can be beautiful. And just enjoy it. Now, we're also moving into this new era, and the new era, we are talking about drone swarms as well as fireworks, and I thought I would show just a little bit of that. This was the first drone swarm I ever tried to do, and I want you to know that the very first thing I did was almost fail entirely because went on location, I looked up in the sky, and I thought, oh my gosh, when I got out there, I didn't realize that the drone swarm was actually way lower on the horizon than I thought, and I almost got completely shut out. So I had to start running. And I managed to walk about 5 or 6 blocks to get to the point where I was actually able to see it. But when I got there, I was really surprised at the creativity and the amazing ability of these drone swarms to show us something that we kind of haven't seen before. You can see me desperately trying to keep walking to get the palm trees out of the way, and here's the main part of the fireworks display kind of coming up. But in just a second, as the trees clear against this American flag thing, you'll start to see what the drone people are starting to do. I mean, we're in Southern California. I think this was in Huntington Beach, and we've got a big blue whale that suddenly morphs into being something else. We've never had this kind of artistic display that I saw before. And think about the programming that's required and the speed that's required and precision for those drones to be able to create a flapping wing. This tells me that the future of these kinds of displays is virtually unlimited. What we're going to be seeing in the future, here's somebody shooting the curl in a wave. I mean, this is almost an unlimited palette for people to work in. So I'm thinking that these outdoor displays, maybe they'll combine traditional fireworks with these kind of drone displays, maybe not. Regardless, it's just an open field for creativity. And as you can see, the ending frame of this is Happy 4th of July written in the sky large. So I'm going to spend more time thinking about these kind of drone displays, thinking about what are the best vantage points. I'm going to start recalibrating my thinking because the fireworks shows of my youth are changing. And I think we're going to have lots and lots more really interesting circumstances. I mentioned I live in San Diego, and we have Mission Bay here. First of all, San Diego is a military town to a certain degree. It's the home base of the Pacific Fleet, so there is a tremendous military presence here, which means 4th of July is a big deal for many people around here. Here's a picture taken from the Big Bay Boom, which is their branding for the San Diego and Mission Bay fireworks show. It is a stunning display. They take 3 usually barges, and those are the launch platforms. This is a really nice shot of all of those displays, and there are hundreds of thousands of people who go out and make it a big celebratory night around Mission Bay. The first time I went to it, I was really surprised at how cool it was and how much time and effort they put into it. But then famously, no matter how much you prepare, no matter how much you do a great job of figuring out you're going to plan for everything, stuff happens. And when I say stuff happens, I'm thinking back to 2012 when famously they had a small problem. All the time and effort they put into the show, somebody wired or programmed something wrong, and this happened. This is everything in the entire show going up in 40 seconds. Whoever programmed whatever they programmed, this is all of the barges all linked by radio shooting everything in the space of 45 seconds. Notice it is not colorful. It's mostly white with a little bit of red tinge. Well, why is that? It's one of those things that I learned as you're opening your iris to catch fireworks. The more light you let in, the more color you lose. And it's one of the reasons it's a bit delicate to try to figure out your settings. Also, it changes, in my experience, over the course of time you're shooting these things. If you start off and you set all of your exposures for one aerial bombardment, one firework, one mortar going up and exploding, then later on, they decide that they're going to add 7 or 8 things. The amount of light suddenly coming into your lens is substantially more, and that, depending on how your camera is set, can cause difficulties. I can't tell you the number of times in my early fireworks shooting when the finale looked way less spectacular than individual bursts simply because the added light of all of them going off kind of blew out the camera sensor, and instead of high saturated colors and things like that, I ended up getting anemic colors. Let's say that's the best thing that I can say about it. So that's all I had in terms of my little presentation. If you have questions, I know we've got a good little group of questions here. We're going to open it up first, though, for Alexander. Alexander, do you have any thoughts and notes?
Yeah, so you were mentioning about the sensor getting blown out too with all that light when those light fireworks go off. Did you ever find yourself using ND filters, polarizer lenses, all that kind of stuff? Or does that help at all for those types of shoots?
I never did. I always tried to use f-stops. I knew I was going to have a high f-stop. You know, you want depth of field here. Shallow depth of field is an enemy here. You want everything to be in focus. So, you know, f11, f15, you want to be up in those really small apertures so that you can get a big depth of field. And then for me, it was usually a matter of dialing exposure, shutter speeds, trying to figure out what was the right shutter speed. I wanted a relatively long exposure, but sometimes, as in the case of a finale, if I had decided to go with a 10-second shutter speed, oh, I'm sorry, saying, oh, there we go. Pardon me. If I had a 10-second exposure, what I found out was if there were just 2 or 3 blooms in that, if I waited for one to go up and then maybe one went up in another direction, I could get a really good long exposure of those two things. But if I left that open and 20 fireworks displays had gone up, suddenly the accumulated light over that long time was fighting against me. I was getting less good quality photos because of that light issue. So in that case, I would have probably tried to shorten that, or maybe, you're right, a neutral density filter or a variable neutral density filter. Watch it. The problem is, on a long exposure like that, you're playing a little bit of a guessing game. What is going to be right for what is going to happen in front of me? I can only guess. I can't know for sure unless I have an open video recorder or something like that, and I'm monitoring it on a monitor. Those have been my experiences.
You need a long shutter speed for that to try to capture, because it's moving so fast, right?
Yeah. I think it in terms of accumulated light. If I'm going to do a 30-second exposure or a bulb exposure on a still camera, so I'm just opening it up and I'm letting whatever happens happen, and we'll see what it turns out like later. The other thing that I didn't mention through the course of talking about that is the process of HDR and RAW, and whether or not you're going to try to get something that you can look at right away, or whether you're trying to capture as much dynamic range as possible and then manipulate that in post-processing. Even with that, though, I've got to tell you, it's still, for me, the issue of all that reflected light off of clouds and things like that. In a perfect world, you get a perfectly black background, and the firework is the star of it. In the real world, you often have a lot of smoke and stuff in the shot, and that really long exposure adds to that lit cloud or smoke field. And instead of a more satisfying, even if you crank up contrast and things like that, I just find them not to be as satisfying. It's me, one way or another.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned RAW, because, we're talking about with HDR, you need as much dynamic ranges as possible. And I know with camera stuff, we're used to shooting stuff in V-Log and stuff like that. So we have that ultimate dynamic range, so you can do that post-processing. What's the equivalent, though? I mean, if you're shooting in RAW, that's one format, but what about the actual video image profile? I haven't done HDR on regular mirrorless camera, so is there like a color profile that's desaturated so you get more dynamic range? Does the color profile matter at all? I'm totally ignorant in that area.
Yeah, there's so much variability in there. The HDR, for example, I've been shooting HDR on my phone for the last couple of years, and it's a really nice format, but is it perfect? No. And that's where my frustration has come from. If we hope for an original dynamic range that is really huge. That's what makes a beautiful firework to me, is that inky black sky behind this beautiful colored burning display of a brilliantly designed firework. Anything that diminishes that dynamic range and smoke lit up by buildings and other fireworks going up is one of the first things to me that limits dynamic range. So even if you're using the best HDR, even if you're shooting RAW and you're going to come to recover it, there's just not that much, that smoke is reducing the dynamic range, not helping you with it. So I really spend as much time on the geography of where I'm going to set up and shoot as I do thinking about anything. Where's the wind likely to be? Can I use one of the weather apps? And if it says there's going to be a breeze tonight on the July 4th out of the west, then I know I probably want to be north or south of that, of the actual display, shooting in one of those directions so that the westerly flow of the wind blows the clouds out of my way. I don't want the smoke coming toward me or going away from me because it's still in the frame. I want it going across the frame with a little bit of wind to clear out the field before each shot. Does that answer the question?
It absolutely does, yeah.
Okay. Let's dive into some of our questions from everybody. And we'll go as long as people have questions. It's a national holiday, so if we end up a little early, we end up a little early. So, Alexander, what do we got first?
Yeah, we got some questions stacking up here. First one's from Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. How do you usually track a launched rocket to where it will explode? I've had some trouble knowing where to aim for the proper framing.
Yeah, my answer to that is that's why you're not going to hope to get the first few. You need to know what your field of view is like. Where are they launching from? How high are they going based on where you are? What your zoom capabilities are? Most of the fireworks displays, they tend to want to spread things out. I mean, they don't just go up vertically from one place. Usually you'll see things going out to the sides. So after the first 15 or 20 aerial bursts are launched, after the first 15 or 20 fireworks mortars have gone off, you kind of get a sense of where their stage is. And then I do two things. Number one, I decide how much I'm going to get some establishing shots that are wide and try to find some of the times when they're going to send up more than one burst and kind of do something wide. And I try to get some wide shots of that. But then I do, for the ones that I like the best, where you're just really getting into the bloom of the firework itself and you don't have a lot of distractions from it, I know where they're generally going. I try to stay a little wider than that with a high-resolution raster so that I know I can mat and move in on the shot that I want afterwards. But I'd say to know where it's going to explode, you can't at first. You just have to have experience of going to that area and seeing that show before. Like with that drone shot, my thinking before I went to get that drone swarm was, oh, it's in Huntington Beach. There's a pier. I'm going to go out where I can see the ocean, and I'm going to use the night sky and the water, and it should be fabulous. And the drones were behind me and behind buildings. And I just totally blew it the first year because I wasn't situationally aware of where I was going to be. The more successful shows I've gone to is where I've been to the show before and I say, oh, okay, here we go. It's in Tempe Beach Park. It's near the Mill Avenue Bridge. I'll be able to get some of these. I'll know where it's happening, and I know where to set up my camera, and I know kind of the azimuth of how high they're going to be. But yeah, it surprises me, and I missed as many as I've gotten. Hopefully that helped, Dave. Let's move on to the next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles asks, you showed a photo where the foreground streaks, but the fireworks did not. Why is that? Okay,
let's talk about a couple of sync issues here. I was learning about still photography, and I ran across this concept called second curtain sync. And for photographers, you will know what I'm talking about. Normally, when you take a photo, particularly a long exposure photo, when you push the button, the flash goes off, and the shutter opens, and then it closes immediately. If it's a longer exposure, it will stay open longer. The third thing that clever photography people do is they created this thing called second curtain sync, where the image, the iris opens, stays open for a while, and then the flash goes off right before the curtain closes. So that's what they term second curtain sync. I have not found that on the digital cameras or the phones. Nobody has programmed that to the best of my knowledge. But in order to do that, it's when are you moving versus when is the burst of light going to happen? So if you're coming into something and, at the beginning of the burst, you can sometimes get kind of a little pre-trail looking things. If you look back at, let me see if I can go back to one of these photos. Okay, there's a pretty decent. So that one, try to think about what we're seeing here and what's going on. I've got a vertical blur that's kind of moved a little bit, so I was probably moving there for the bright thing going up on the left. The right is the burst, and so I probably open the shutter, let that burst go up on the left, and then tapped over to a different framing, and that's where that explosion took place. It's really thinking in terms of the time frame of your exposure being the time of the entire trail and explosion of the firework. It's trial and error. It's the fun of being out there and looking at, what am I going to shoot? What's it going to do? And how can I fiddle around to make it something more fun? That's what I enjoy anyway. To me, this is very much an experimental kind of thing. Next question.
Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada is back with a question about, you showed a photo. Hold on a second. I've lost the questions here.
Yeah, I think for some reason it looks like we're having a little bit of trouble in the back end.
Dave Trotman is asking a question now with 4K video. Is it plausible to get pretty good stills from video?
Pretty good, yes. Unfortunately, again, here's the thing with video. In video, your timing, your temporal thing is going to be at the frame rate of the camera. So rather than opening up, which you can with a still photo, with a DSLR, or even with a phone with using one of these tools like long exposure or halide, instead of being able to open the iris, leave that light gathering happening, you're going to be constantly at 30 or 24 frames a second. So you're going to have a whole bunch of still frames. So it becomes harder to do these kind of things without some sort of digital trails manipulation. You can get pretty good stills from video, yes. Would I set up a video camera and use that to record the whole the fireworks show? I generally wouldn't. And it's just because I want to enjoy the show too. I like the fact that, let me see what that is. Oh, that's nice. Let me fire the shutter. Or look at that. That's pretty. Let me do it. Let me set up for the next one. They've just done a big burst. I think they're going to do some smaller things. Let me zoom in a little, get ready, and open the shutter and see what happens in front of the lens. That's the kind of thinking I do during shooting fireworks shows, and I like to see what kind of extra results you get from playing around with it. But yeah, pretty good. Yes, you can definitely get pretty good. These 4K and 8K and now 16K image sensors can do a good job. Let's go to the next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, can we talk about the use of HDR and the ability to capture high nit values? Is it the quality of the camera or the quality of the codec that has the greatest impact on the final product?
My answer to that is yes, it's all of everything. HDR is great because having more stops of dynamic range means that you're going to be able to manipulate things in post. There's a lot of, if you do searches on terms like exposed to the left and things like that, in the photographic world, people talk about when you get higher dynamic ranges, where do you want to set your camera to capture? Do you want to push the average brightness between the boundaries lower or higher in that dynamic range to get the best results with what you're seeing? That, to me, in my thinking, goes right hand in hand with the fact that this single burst of a red firework is going to be much less intensive in terms of its overall illumination than a 5-burst array with some white or high-intensity, sparkly kind of things. It's going to allow much more light from the display to hit my lens. And so I kind of underexpose a little bit, thinking that maybe I'll bring a little bit of extra gain into it. But do be careful. Remember, the field of view for this, I like a dark black field of view that the fireworks are against. If you overexpose and let too much light through, and you can get into noisy black areas, and then you're trying to apply noise reduction onto something that is really hard to noise reduce. And so I just trial and error, be careful, figure out what you get, pay attention to your settings, write notes to yourself, and just, if you like this, and have fun with it. Don't try to do too much swings. And I got to say, the automated stuff, particularly the computational photography on iPhones and things like that, you can get really darn good things just kind of using the auto settings. If you want to go farther than that, my suggestion is this is a challenging way to shoot. So I want as much control as possible that I can get a hold of. the codec, if it's messing with clarity, if it's not capturing all the resolution and passing it along right, or if it's doing things like derived color depth from lesser values, this is a once in a lifetime moment to take this photo. I stay away from trying to use too heavy a codec on anything. I'd shoot raw or HDR or something that gives me the maximum amount of data if I had to, when I have to. Let's go on to the next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada asks, are there other nighttime displays that would be good to practice on since fireworks are rare occasions for most people?
Mark Giuliani, you had some thoughts?
Well, so this is actually more of a question on top of a question. It would seem to me that practicing against, by taking pictures of the full moon, because of the contrast there between the dark sky and everything, teaches you how to set your f-stop to, 9 or so and lowering your ISO down to about 100 so you can get that detail of the moon. Now, I know there's timing involved, but it's a start to kind of teach you how to use the equipment you have to get the most detail out of that, which will translate to the motion of the firework.
100% agree with that. And in fact, even if you just try to do nightscapes, like maybe you have an overlook on top of a freeway, one of the traditional kind of like long exposure things is to do car taillight trails. So you'd open up your shutter and leave it up for 30 seconds while your scene includes a roadway with a lot of traffic at night, and you'll see those trails. In fact, I think one of my earlier shots had a huge example of, let's see, there we go. That one has a ton of light trails, and that's how you do that. You open up a shutter, you let in this case, boats go by, and you get those trails that you're seeing in the lower third of this. To me, shooting at night over top of a freeway or shooting at night in a downtown where you have all the twinkling lights of the office buildings, you can do a lot of learning with that kind of circumstance because you're trying to balance where are the windows in the office buildings getting blown out. Oh, that long an exposure is too long. I can see a nice view in the other things, but I'm losing all the detail inside the windows. And so you have to figure out how to adjust for that. Maybe you're going to dial it back a little bit. Mark?
And I think something that we should mention of this is that a lot of times you're using the bulb mode to hold the shutter open.
Yeah.
As long as you do, you want to get that, to adjust that.
Absolutely. If you have a camera that has those kind of indicators, that little picture of a bulb comes up means that once you push the shutter button, sometimes it's as long as you hold it down, or sometimes it's until you hit it again, the shutter will stay open and it will gather light. It's particularly good when you're shooting out in nature far away and you want to get astrophotography done, or you want to get like you're in the forest and you want to do a really long exposure, maybe where the stars are circling overhead or something like that. That's where bulb mode comes into play. Alexander was in and then back out. So if you didn't have anything to say, we can just go on to the next question.
No, I'm okay. Let's go to the next question here. Then this one is for me. If you're not using a modern smartphone that can do HDR, what would the workflow look like to do HDR photos on a mirrorless camera?
Well, there are some things like exposure stacking that I have seen people do. It's really hard to do for fireworks because a fireworks is a momentary thing, right? You're going to hear the pop of the mortar. You're going to watch a little spark of light go up, which is really useful because if you're on some tripod or something like that where you can adjust a little bit, you can kind of see how far the burst is going up. And then eventually you're going to get this burst that's going to last, 2-3 seconds before it fades out, sometimes longer, maybe 4 seconds. But that's the whole event. Once it's over, it's over. So things like traditional still camera stacking of exposure or focus for that matter really don't work in this kind of things. I'm not sure that any different than the traditional things you do on a DSLR. I can't think of anything different that I would do to try to do that shooting HDR. That's just a difference in what your camera is capturing. So I don't have an answer for that. Unless somebody else does, we may have to go on to the next question.
All right, next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Is the zebra setting at 70% your friend when shooting fireworks?
It's good to know about, and it's certainly good to understand exposure setting, particularly the way I use that even to today in the modern day is I set a 70% IRA to be yellow in my false color settings on my monitor. And then that tradition is designed for the basic luminance of the human face. And so it'll tell you whether your face is exposed. Now, we're using it for fireworks, and so it's somewhere between, it's below full bright, but it's not all the way up the scale or not all the way down the scale and it's too dark. So I've never tried doing it. It'd be interesting to see whether zebras how they would react and whether they would react fast enough in fireworks. I'd have to try that sometimes. I haven't, but it's an interesting question, Roscoe. Thanks for asking it. Unless somebody else has, we'll just move on to the next question.
Next question is from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. What ISO helps the most with lowering noise in the signal?
As low as possible, with the exception of if your camera has dual ISO, and that happens in a lot of cameras these days. It'll say ISO 600 and 3200. If it's built with dual ISO, you can use either of those two sets and it'll keep the noise relatively low. But generally speaking, ISO is electronic gain, and shooting against a black field, that's when you start getting noisy blacks and shadows. So stay on the native or stay as low as possible. ISO 100 is your friend if you don't have any other choices. Let's go to the next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania asks, what equipment or apps do a good job of multi-exposure processing? Can this technique be used for video?
Generally, I've never seen anybody use it for video. Multi-exposure processing is when you have more than one capture and you stack them together to improve the it's kind of a compositing technique. And the problem for me with this kind of photography, it's going to bring up multiple exposures. If you have a pristine view and you've got dark blacks there, adding black to another black to another black may not damage the result you get. But as in some of those photos I showed you earlier, if there's a lot of smoke in the air from previous fireworks and it is somewhat bright compared to the field that your firework is in, stacking those exposures on top of each other is just going to make those milky sections brighter and give you less contrast in your overall exposure. That's what I kind of concentrate on trying to get this exposure as close to right as I can, manipulating it however I need to get that done, rather than using multi-exposure processing. Maybe there is a way, I just don't know how to do it. Compositing, on the other hand, and stacking, most of those really wow photos that I showed you at the beginning, stuff like this, I'm pretty sure that those are highly manipulated and carefully processed and probably composites of most things. I'm not sure that actually happened in the real world just like it looks. I would be shocked if someone found that perfect place where that circular wheel and those buildings balanced each other out and every burst hit in a negative space from every other burst. That doesn't seem very realistic to me. So I think that may be a built composite. I could be wrong, but I think maybe. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, could an ND filter be useful for extremely bright scenes like fireworks, and would 60 frame rates per second help make them look more natural?
I think ND filters could be useful, but remember that this single firework burst is not going to be anywhere near as bright as the finale, which has 15 or 20 in rapid succession happening. And if you open the lens and do a long exposure on that finale, the chances are it's not going to be particularly colorful because every additive piece of light that's coming from all those bursts are going to make your frame less contrasty and dynamic and pretty, to my way of thinking. 60 frames per second, I don't generally shoot video of fireworks. And that's just me, so I don't really have much information on that. I don't know if it'd be better or worse. I will say that high shutter speeds tend to make motion a little more stuttery. So maybe if you're following one of those pretty fireworks where they're allowing a trail to come out as the arc of the firework goes up, sometimes the mortar goes off and you don't see anything until it hits at the top. Other times they have something in the package. The mortar goes off and you see a trail of light and sparks until it gets to the burst point. I've seen it happen both ways. I don't know, Douglas. This is where you have to go out and just practice and play and play and play and try and see what works, and you get better at it every time you do it. Let's go to the next question.
This one's for me. I noticed that a lot of mirrorless cameras have an HDR photo mode. Is this actually true HDR, or are they faking it?
Is there any way to know? I mean, what is fakery anymore? We're in this process of trying to gather light through a lens. It's going to hit an imager, and that's going to translate it, and they're going to read out all these voltages and turn that into a picture. There's a lot of dynamic range here. It is possible to get a satisfying photograph of fireworks. We've all done it. If it's just the right time, your camera's set just right, and you're at the right place at the right time, and you have it pointed at something, you can get something that really looks awesome, and the colors are true, and everything is fun to look at. And then, right after that, the next one come by, and it doesn't work as well. And sometimes, I think HDR is a good thing. As I explained at the beginning of this, the contrast, the range of contrast, the exposure delta that you need between a single firework and the finale is pretty huge. And so to me, fireworks photography is constant adjustment. It's constant fiddling. It's constant trying to get right so that maybe one of the next 5 photos I take is going to be a keeper. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, has anyone tried using false color to set firework exposures? Do we think it might help?
Yeah, I mentioned that before. I think it might. I think false color I've found to be really useful, particularly the systems where you can set the point of the color. I mean, you may have set 70 IRE as your yellow marker to indicate. I mean, that's pretty typical on exposure false color where you're looking at people's faces. And so, but if you want to move that to 80 or 90 IRE or move it down to 50 IRE, so that you can keep your exposures really dialed down and maybe make that sky darker than it would have been otherwise. I think it could help. I'd play with it. I'd definitely play with it the next time I go out. Let's go to the next one. Next question.
Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. Have you tried getting shots of the Northern Lights?
I never have. I have never been been anywhere where the Northern Lights are prominent. I would love to do that at some time in my life, but I have just not been lucky enough to have that as a possibility. I think we've gone through all our questions, which is fine. It's a holiday, and I'm happy to kind of do our farewells. And thank you for spending part of your 4th of July with us here at Office Hours. Let's see. Was there another question? No. That was the last one. So I will do our standard close, which is to tell everybody thank you so much for being a part of the Office Hours experience today. If I didn't say it to you, if you showed up late, happy U.S. 4th of July. For those of you who are celebrating Independence Day, please be safe out there, particularly if you're fiddling around with fireworks or anything like them. Safety first always. But that takes care of the show. So to our producers, to everybody who added a question today, thank you so much for doing that. You make the show what it is every day. The panelists who showed up, everybody who came here today, even though I know a lot of people had to run out because there are a lot, as I said, of picnics and barbecues and things like that. We appreciate your spending a little bit of your 4th of July with us. So thank you all panelists. The back end crew. Amazing group of people all over the world and traveling all over the world. I mean, a lot of the people who produce this show, they pop on Tuesday and they're in one state, and on Thursday they pop back in to do their job and to help in the back end and make it all work. And they're in an entirely different part of the country or the different part of the world. And they're still showing up here to help us do this every day. And we appreciate each and every one of you. The Talak Traversal today was actually pretty robust. I'm surprised because I thought as a holiday it would be quieter, but we traveled 79,000 miles. That's 128,000 kilometers or 628 million bananas for scale. Thanks for being around and watching. See you next week or tomorrow or whenever. Thank you guys for hanging in till the bitter end.
Thank you. It was
Great
interesting.
presentation.
Nice presentation. Happy
It
for
was fun. I've always loved fireworks. Such a challenge.
All right, guys. Have a great 4th.
You do the same thing.
See ya.
Mark, take care of yourself. You're in Washington, D.C. You'll have the big...
No, I'm actually in Rehoboth, so the fireworks are Saturday. I'm at the beach.
Right. Awesome. Awesome.
Right.
Adios.
I got out of Washington.
That phrase has been said a lot, I would think, over the course.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.